Imagine telling a Ferrari owner that a family wagon carrying groceries, luggage, and 2 child seats could keep up with him on the highway. 20 years ago, he would have laughed. 10 years ago, he might have argued. Today, thanks to the Audi RS6, he probably checks his mirrors first. But the story of the RS6 C8 doesn't begin with a 4.0-liter twin-turbocharged V8. It doesn't even begin with the RS6 itself. It begins with a question Audi has been asking for decades: what if practicality didn't have to come at the expense of performance? Most manufacturers treated performance cars and family cars as two completely different worlds. One was built for excitement. The other was built for responsibility. Audi looked at those categories and decided they were unnecessary. The roots of that philosophy go all the way back to the legendary RS2 Avant in the 1990s, a station wagon developed with Porsche that shocked the automotive world by delivering sports car performance in a practical family package. The idea sounded absurd at the time, yet buyers loved it. Over the years, Audi continued refining the formula. RS4, RS6. Bigger engines. More power. Better technology. Faster acceleration. Each generation pushed the concept further. While rivals focused on coupes and supercars, Audi quietly perfected something much stranger: the super wagon. By the late 2010s, however, the automotive world was changing. Crossovers were taking over. Governments were introducing stricter emissions regulations. Large engines were slowly disappearing. Manufacturers were talking about electrification, efficiency, and sustainability. Logic suggested that the age of high-performance V8 wagons was coming to an end. If Audi was ever going to build the ultimate RS6, the time was now. And that's exactly what happened. When the RS6 Avant C8 arrived in 2019, it looked less like a family wagon and more like something that had escaped from a secret engineering laboratory. Audi engineers widened the body dramatically. The front and rear fenders were massively flared. The stance was aggressive. The air intakes looked enormous. Almost every body panel was redesigned compared to the standard A6 Avant. Only the roof, front doors, and tailgate remained shared with the regular car. Everything else existed for one purpose: to make a practical family vehicle look capable of attacking the Autobahn at full speed. And the appearance wasn't lying. Under the hood sat a 4.0-liter twin-turbocharged V8 producing nearly 600 horsepower in standard form. Numbers like that used to belong exclusively to exotic machinery. Yet Audi was installing them into a wagon with enough cargo space for a family vacation. Press the accelerator and the RS6 exploded forward with an urgency that seemed impossible for something of its size. The sprint to 100 km/h happened in well under 4 seconds. Suddenly the idea of a family wagon embarrassing sports cars wasn't a joke anymore. It was reality. And perhaps the most incredible part was how effortless it all felt. The RS6 wasn't a stripped-out track machine. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't demanding. It could cruise through city traffic, take children to school, handle daily errands, and then moments later unleash performance that would have terrified supercar owners a generation earlier. This dual personality became the secret behind the RS6's success. Many high-performance cars force owners to make sacrifices. They sacrifice comfort, practicality, visibility, or everyday usability. The RS6 asked for almost nothing in return. It offered speed without compromise. And that made it incredibly desirable. But Audi's engineers weren't finished. The legendary quattro all-wheel drive system transformed the way the car deployed its power. Hundreds of horsepower could be unleashed with astonishing confidence regardless of weather conditions. Rain, snow, cold roads, imperfect surfaces, situations that would make many performance cars nervous barely seemed to affect the RS6. The result was a machine that owners could actually use every day. This wasn't a weekend toy sitting under a cover in a garage. It was a supercar you could live with. A supercar that happened to have a giant trunk. A supercar that could transport furniture one day and hunt down exotic machinery on the Autobahn the next. Yet despite all its performance, the RS6 represented something deeper than horsepower figures and acceleration times. It represented Audi's refusal to abandon an idea that most manufacturers never fully understood. An idea that practicality and excitement could coexist. An idea that family responsibilities didn't mean giving up passion. And in a world increasingly dominated by SUVs and electrification, the RS6 C8 would become the ultimate expression of that philosophy. The question was no longer whether Audi could build the perfect super wagon. The question was whether the world would ever see another one like it again. The success of the RS6 created a strange situation for Audi. The car had originally been designed as a halo vehicle, a machine that demonstrated what the company's engineers were capable of achieving. Yet by the early 2020s, it had become something much bigger. The RS6 wasn't simply another performance model anymore. It had become the face of Audi's entire enthusiast division. Social media played a huge role in that transformation. Every time an RS6 appeared online, people reacted the same way. There was something almost irresistible about the concept. A Ferrari was expected to be fast. A Lamborghini was expected to be dramatic. But a station wagon humiliating supercars? That captured people's attention immediately. Videos of RS6s launching from traffic lights, dominating highway poles, and keeping pace with exotic machinery spread across the internet. Millions of people who had never cared about wagons suddenly wanted one. Athletes bought them. Business owners bought them. Celebrities bought them. Car enthusiasts bought them. The RS6 became one of those rare vehicles capable of appealing to almost everyone. And the reason was simple: it solved a problem most performance cars couldn't. Imagine owning a traditional supercar. It attracts attention everywhere. It can be uncomfortable. It struggles with luggage. It struggles with passengers. It often feels like an event every time you drive it. For some people, that's exactly what they want. But for many others, real life gets in the way. They have families. They have responsibilities. They need space. They need practicality. The RS6 offered an alternative. It delivered nearly all the excitement while remaining astonishingly useful. Owners could drive across entire countries in comfort, load the trunk with luggage, carry friends or family, and still have access to performance that would embarrass many sports cars. In some ways, the RS6 became the ultimate answer to a question enthusiasts had been asking for years: if you could own only one car, what would it be? More often than not, the RS6 appeared near the top of the list. Yet perhaps the most remarkable achievement of the C8 generation was how it managed to feel modern while staying true to its roots. Audi had spent nearly 3 decades refining the formula first introduced by the RS2. Every generation added more power, more technology, and more capability. But the core idea never changed. The RS6 was still a family car at heart. It still prioritized practicality. It still embraced the idea that speed and usefulness didn't have to be enemies. That philosophy became increasingly rare as manufacturers shifted their focus toward SUVs. Ironically, even as crossovers dominated global sales, the RS6 continued proving there was still something special about a fast wagon. It offered lower weight, better handling, and a driving experience that many enthusiasts preferred over larger vehicles. In a market full of compromises, the RS6 somehow felt like a machine that refused to compromise at all. But while customers were celebrating the car's success, a storm was forming around the entire industry. Emissions regulations were becoming stricter every year. Governments were pushing manufacturers toward electrification. Large displacement engines were disappearing at an alarming rate. Naturally aspirated V10s were already gone. V12s were becoming increasingly rare. Even V8s were starting to look endangered. Suddenly, the RS6 4.0-liter twin-turbocharged V8 wasn't just a powerful engine. It was becoming a symbol of an era that was slowly coming to an end. Enthusiasts began to realize something. Cars like the RS6 might not exist forever. The automotive world that had produced machines like the RS2, the original RS6, and now the C8 was changing faster than anyone expected. Every year brought more hybrids, more electric vehicles, and more pressure on traditional performance cars. That reality gave the RS6 an unexpected significance. It wasn't merely a fast Audi anymore. It was becoming one of the last great representatives of a philosophy that had defined German performance engineering for decades. A philosophy built around big engines, relentless power, high-speed autobahn capability, and the belief that practicality should never limit performance. And as the industry continued evolving, one question became impossible to ignore. If the RS6 represented the peak of that philosophy, what would happen when the era of V8-powered superwagons finally came to an end? The answer would ultimately determine how the RS6 C8 would be remembered in automotive history. By the middle of the 2020s, the Audi RS6 was no longer just competing with BMW, Mercedes-Benz, or Porsche. In a strange way, it was competing against time itself. Because every year the automotive industry moved further toward electrification, software, and efficiency, while the RS6 continued representing something increasingly rare, a machine built around a massive twin-turbocharged V8 and the idea that driving should still feel mechanical, emotional, and slightly excessive. Audi engineers knew the world was changing. They knew regulations were tightening. They knew the future would look very different from the era that created the original RS2 and the generations of RS models that followed. Yet instead of making the RS6 smaller, quieter, or less dramatic, they delivered one final masterpiece of the formula. The result was a car that seemed to exist in defiance of modern logic. It was enormous, heavy, practical, luxurious, and yet somehow capable of accelerating with the violence of a supercar. It could spend an entire day carrying a family across a country in complete comfort and then arrive at a racetrack ready to embarrass machines that looked far more exotic. That contradiction became the reason people fell in love with it. The RS6 wasn't trying to be sensible. It wasn't trying to be efficient. It wasn't trying to save the world. It existed because a group of engineers still believed there was value in building something extraordinary. And perhaps that's why the car resonated so strongly with enthusiasts. Deep down, everyone knew they were witnessing the end of something. The era of big German performance wagons powered by thunderous V8 engines wasn't guaranteed to survive forever. The automotive world that produced these machines was slowly disappearing. Yet here was the RS6, refusing to go quietly. Every startup, every downshift, every pull onto the highway felt like a reminder of what made enthusiasts fall in love with cars in the first place. Not numbers on a screen. Not software updates. Not algorithms. But the feeling of a great engine, great engineering, and a machine built by people who genuinely cared about creating something unforgettable. That's why the Audi RS6 C8 became more than just another fast wagon. It became the ultimate expression of a philosophy Audi had spent decades perfecting. A philosophy that began with the RS2, survived through generations of increasingly insane performance cars, and ultimately reached its peak in a vehicle capable of carrying a family while hunting supercars. In a world obsessed with choosing between practicality and passion, the RS6 refused to choose. And maybe that's why so many people consider it one of the greatest Audis ever built. Not because it was the fastest. Not because it was the most expensive. But because it achieved something far more difficult. It made people believe that having everything was still possible. The most incredible thing about the Audi RS6 C8 is that it shouldn't exist. If you gathered a room full of accountants, environmental regulators, and market analysts and asked them to design the future of the automobile, almost nobody would have ended up with a 600 horsepower twin-turbo V8 wagon capable of carrying a family and outrunning sports cars. Yet Audi built it anyway. And perhaps that is exactly why the RS6 became such an icon. It represents a version of the automotive industry that is slowly disappearing. A time when engineers were still allowed to be a little irrational. A time when a manufacturer could look at a practical family wagon and ask a completely unreasonable question: what if we made it faster than most supercars? The answer became one of the most celebrated performance cars of the modern era. Decades from now, people probably won't remember every crossover that filled the roads during the 2020s. They won't remember every efficient commuter vehicle. But they will remember the RS6. They will remember the sound of the V8, the impossibly wide bodywork, the way a car carrying luggage and child seats could suddenly launch toward the horizon like an exotic machine worth 3 times as much. Because the RS6 was never really about practicality, and it was never really about speed. It was about proving that passion and logic could exist in the same machine. It was about refusing to accept that performance cars had to be impractical or that family cars had to be boring. And if this truly becomes one of the last great V8-powered Audi wagons, then the RS6 C8 will be remembered not simply as a fast car, but as the final chapter of an extraordinary idea that began decades earlier with the RS2. An idea that a wagon could be more exciting than a supercar. An idea that sounded ridiculous when Audi first tried it. And an idea that, against all odds, changed automotive history forever.